A child you've never met, a complete stranger, approaches you and asks for help. What would you do? Come on, it's a child. Small, powerless, frightened. It's a kid. Do you refuse? Do you turn away? Do you slam the door? Probably not. We're learning that the human brain seems to be hardwired for compassion, for empathy. And even the stoniest adult with zero patience for nonsense typically softens when a child is in distress. That's a good thing. That's how we keep the species going. But what if that child standing before you asking for help isn't really a child at all? Then what?
And then make out a small beam of light against the mirror.
Truly weird stuff.
Brian Bethel is a senior staff writer at the Abilene Reporter News. He's been working at the paper since April 1995. I've known a lot of print journalists over the course of my own career, and Brian strikes me as a reporter's reporter, meaning he loves the work, loves the nuts and bolts of ferreting out the story, loves being wired into the community. And like many reporters, he's way more interested in telling the story than in being the story. Reporters like this are an endangered species because local newspapers are in the fight for their very lives. Did you know that the U.S. has lost more than 25% of its local papers since 2005? Did you know that by 2025, it's predicted that this country will have lost a third of its newspapers? It's bad for the people who work for newspapers, bad for the communities those papers serve, and frankly, it's just really grim for all of us. Because while the national news outlets are fighting for clicks and likes by pandering to whatever foaming at the mouth divisive story is riling up readers and viewers, local journalists are doing the far less sexy job of holding people and institutions accountable at the grassroots level, which is where you feel it most, right? Your roads, your schools, your safety. Strong, healthy local newspapers help create a shared community, and they're critical to a functioning democracy. I'm not saying that newspapers do a perfect job or that all reporters are icons of objectivity, but I can promise you they are not there for the money or for the fame. They're there out of a sense of deep purpose. They're committed, like Brian Bethel, who's been telling Abilene stories now for 3 decades. What Brian didn't anticipate is how it feels to become the story. It happened in Abilene in 1996. Brian had a bill to pay for his internet services, and the company offered an after-hours drop box at a strip shopping center. It was somewhere between 9:30 and 10 p.m. when he pulled into the lot, parking right near the Westwood Theater, showing movies for $1.50. As he sat in his car writing out a check under the lights of the theater marquee, he didn't notice 2 young boys approach the vehicle. He was startled by a tapping on the driver's side window. Rolling it down slightly, Bethel took in the 2 kids and described feeling a sudden, soul-racking fear, something he couldn't even understand at the time. It's a strip mall parking lot and 2 kids. What in the world would inspire a reaction as intense as that? Looking at the boys, Bethel guessed their ages to be somewhere between 9 and 14 years old. Initially, nothing about them seemed at all unusual. Average build, baggy clothes, hoodies. One boy had brown hair and an olive complexion. The other had pale skin and light red hair. Yet even as Bethel had the thought that the 2 boys were probably about to ask him for money, something odd happened. Bethel described it as being a change in perception, a feeling he suddenly had that it was already too late to escape whatever was coming next. One of the boys said that they wanted to go to the movies to see Mortal Kombat, but had forgotten their money at home and needed Brian Bethel to drive them there. Was it the strangeness of the situation? Something not quite right about the two kids? Something in the smile of the boy who was speaking? What was it that made Bethel not just nervous, but fearful? Fearful in a way that made no sense. Bethel swallowed against the cold apprehension flooding his body.
Come on, mister.
We just want to go to our house, and we're two little boys.
He flicked his gaze to the movie theater marquee, then at the clock on his dashboard. The last showing of the night had already started, an hour earlier.
Just let us in your car. It won't take long.
How were the boys suddenly so much closer to the car? How had he not seen them move? He'd only glanced at the marquee. His peripheral vision should have caught the movement. Yet there they were, standing motionless beside the vehicle, their arms hanging at their sides.
Come on, mister.
Let us in. We can't get in your car till you let us, you know? Just let us in, and we'll be gone before you know it.
Bethel's hand was on the car door's lock. He was in the act of unlocking and opening the door when he suddenly came back to himself and yanked his hand away. It was then that he made full eye contact with the taller of the two boys and realized with a sickening jolt that the child's eyes were utterly and completely black. No iris, no sclera, just two deep black holes. Brian later told a radio host named Rudy Fernandez,
"The boys kept staring at me with those cold, coal black eyes. My fear must have been easily detected because the older of the two boys that had been doing all the talking started pounding on my window, stating, 'We can't come into your car until you invite us in. You have to let us in.'"
Bethel's engine had been running the entire time, and now, thoroughly frightened, he reached for the gear shift.
Come on, mister. We won't hurt you. You have to let us in.
And threw the car into reverse.
We can't come in unless you tell us it's okay. Let us in.
Heart racing, Brian Bethel peeled out of that shopping center parking lot in reverse, and just a few seconds later, maybe all of 2 seconds, when he swung his head back around and yanked the gear shift into drive, the two boys were gone. The parking lot deserted. The sidewalk in front of the movie theater empty. It didn't seem possible that two children could simply vanish. No way they could have run and hidden that quickly. No way. And yet, the two boys were gone. It was August of the next year, 1997, that Bethel posted a document he'd written about the experience in a Google group. He'd already shared the story with a handful of people close to him and didn't expect much response after putting it online. What happened next first surprised and then overwhelmed him. Today, we'd say Bethel's story went viral, but the term didn't yet exist back in 1997. Some people say that Brian Bethel's is the first ever account of these peculiar black-eyed children and was the spark for the extraordinary flood of stories that soon followed. Some have disputed the truth of the tale, saying that Bethel's story is just creepypasta, slang for horror legends or stories or content posted on the internet. Skeptics and debunkers argue that Bethel's just having a laugh and getting rich off his tall tale. But Bethel is still working his newsfeed in Abilene, not counting piles of money in an island retreat. Nothing about that weird encounter with those two boys
Just let us in your car. It won't take long.
Made his life easier, or made him rich, or famous. In fact, as he told the author Michael Weatherly in the revised second edition of Weatherly's book, The Black-Eyed Children, that this was a story initially meant for just a few people. He said he understands now why it captured so much attention. And he also said,
"I've not made a dime from this incident, and in fact, it's exactly the sort of thing a professional journalist normally wouldn't talk openly about."
If you ask Bethel what these kids are, he'll tell you very simply that he just doesn't know. Weatherly's book quotes Bethel as saying, and get ready, because the eerie factor here is right off the charts.
What I do know about them is they are predators, and we are the food. I don't think they eat us in any literal sense, but they do want something from us. These are beings that have no light within them, soulless and eternally hungry. I know they mean their victims irreparable harm. Perhaps they make more of their kind this way, or perhaps they just steal the light within us. Until you've been on the receiving end of those terrible dark eyes filled with hate and torn from the very depths of night and time, I'm not sure you can understand.
Let us in.
Urban legend? Maybe. One of the more charming things about human beings is how much we love a good story. We like to hear them, and we like to tell them. Urban legends are just stories that we tell each other. Sometimes funny, sometimes shocking, sometimes scary. The trick to a good urban legend is the personal connection. You know, something like, my cousin's boss has a neighbor who, or I went to high school with this kid whose older sister, or this dude I used to hang out with has an ex-wife that. It's this personal touch that gives the urban legend a little extra dusting of credibility. And even when you don't buy a particular story, there's a part of your brain that still might cling to the notion of a grain of truth. I mean, think about it. Would we even have all these wild stories of a man with a hook for a hand hiding in the backseat of the car if it hadn't happened for real, at least once, somewhere, to someone? You can see the way these stories work on our imaginations. We want to believe. Urban legends are a kind of folklore. And folklore is basically just knowledge that's been passed through the community and down the generations by word of mouth, typically often in the form of stories. The invention of the printing press transformed some of those stories into the written word. The invention of the internet allowed stories to bypass the gatekeepers who decide what gets published and disseminated. Now, suddenly, we have a new kind of fireside tale, the teller unseen, and instead of the fire's embers, we gather around a screen of glowing pixels. Fairy tales, fables, myths, they're all types of folklore. Think about the story of the Pied Piper. It's a pretty dark take on greed. The story goes, the Pied Piper comes to town and agrees to rid the people of their plague of vermin. The Piper strikes a deal with the mayor for payment. When the mayor reneges, the Pied Piper lures all the village children away, never to be seen again. Yikes. The moral of that story is, keep your word and pay your bills, or risk the most tragic consequences. Then there's the myth of Icarus and his wings crafted from wax and feathers, wings that would help he and his father escape from the high tower where they had been imprisoned by the king. The father, Daedalus, warned his son to be careful. Fly too close to the surface of the sea, and his wings would become too wet. Fly too close to the sun, and the heat would melt the wax. But Icarus, young and brimming with confidence, was thrilled to be soaring across the sky, flying higher and higher, laughing at the gulls, unable to hear his father's warning cries. And you know how that one ended. Icarus plunging into the sea and drowning. The moral of that story is, don't get cocky. Hubris goething before a deadly fall into the ocean and all that. So, folklore is a way to transmit values, to share information, and to teach. Let's talk about volcanoes for a minute. Thousands of years ago, people didn't have the understanding of geology and seismology that we do now. So, how did they account for the Earth periodically and unpredictably rumbling and splitting and belching fire and vast rivers of molten rock? The ancient Romans were like, oh, that's just Vulcan, the god of fire, doing some metal work in his god forge. The Chinese have the dragon Long Wang, who lives in the mountains of northern China and has dominion over the forces of the earth, including volcanoes. And in Iceland, it was believed that the top of the volcano Hekla offered one of many entrances to hell. Other Icelandic volcanoes were said to also have gateways. And here's how deep the superstition about Hekla went. No one dared even climb the volcano until 1750. It was apparently a huge relief to all when the first two climbers to summit Hekla didn't find Satan's welcome mat waiting for them at the top. So what makes folklore fascinating is that these stories and myths and legends and allegories are often rooted in truth and reality. There are scholars who study the myths of dragons, for example, to compare the fables of the fire-breathing beast to the known geological record in hopes of matching the tales of dragons to the dates and places of actual volcanic eruptions. Biblical scholars cross-pollinate with archaeologists on the regular. And while historians do tend to give folklore a little bit of the side eye, these oral histories and community tales can tell us a lot about the people who lived inside the hard date of history. Yeah, here's the battle, the siege, the famine. But it's the folklore around those events that give us a glimpse into who those people were who fought and struggled and starved. Folklore is like a little taste of time travel. With it, we get to see how people of another era used their knowledge of the world, the knowledge they had, to make sense of the world. So let's take a look at these black-eyed kids. Although it would be more accurate to call them black-eyed entities, since not every encounter involves a child. As more and more people have come forward to share their experiences with these mysterious beings, it's become clear that they also manifest in adult bodies. But what are they? I mean, if we take these reports at face value, it starts seeming unlikely that these are just regular people playing a prank. Let's consider what we know. One, the black-eyed kids are almost always described as very pale. Sometimes it's a washed-out olive complexion, sometimes more of a pasty gray, and their hair is often described as shaggy, almost like they're way overdue for a trim. The clothing is typically described as loose, shapeless, unusual, or old-fashioned in a way that those who encounter them struggle to pin down. Hoodies are a common feature in these stories, but you'll also find witnesses who describe the clothing as Victorian or kind of Amish, or just slightly off, just enough to trip your instinctive sensors that something here is not quite right. The body language is always passive, arms hanging at their sides. No weapons visible, very little movement. The voices are flat, monotone, as blank and matter-of-fact as their words. And even as the encounter escalates, their delivery loses none of its flatness. Yet despite that flat, emotionless tone, witnesses report feeling almost hypnotized. Look at Brian Bethel's account. His hand was reaching to unlock the car door, even as panic, fear, and adrenaline flooded his body.
Just let us in, it won't take long.
Just let us in, it won't take long.
These entities often appear in places where an unaccompanied child is unlikely to be, the kinds of places that don't seem at all safe for a kid. Like that strip mall parking lot where Brian Bethel heard that tap-tapping on his driver's side window. Or like this isolated camping spot in upstate New York where a Redditor named Exo Lowray had this encounter.
It was in upstate New York near Elmira at the old Lackawanna Trail truck stop. I was staying in my motorhome with my dog and got a knock on the door just around 3 a.m. It was completely pitch black, raining out. What I noticed was a teenage girl with a hoodie on and a backpack, and she asked if she could come in. I said no, and I asked, "Where are her parents?" She didn't reply. I asked her if she was hungry or thirsty, and I dropped a lunch sack out my window for her with $20 inside. I made a comment about her safety and her well-being, but again, she stayed quiet. But this time, she looked at my dog, who was next to me, and chuckled. It wasn't until my dog started going crazy did I realize this young girl was pale as a ghost and had strange black eyes. I immediately closed my window shut, grabbed my revolver, and watched her walk onto the old railroad tracks along the highway.
Story after story recounts how these kids just appeared on the doorstep of a house in the country, set well back from the road, no neighbors, or standing on the side of a road or highway late at night, not a house or a building anywhere in sight. So yeah, they turn up in odd and unexpected places, but even more troubling, how they can somehow disappear in an instant, leaving no trace behind. Equally puzzling is the way they move. People who have had encounters report that these children could be standing 6 feet away in one instant and 6 inches away in the next. Yet these witnesses claim to have not seen any physical movement, nor heard anything suggesting movement. Not footsteps on the porch, not the rustling of leaves, not the sound of sneakers pounding pavement. Pale beings who arguably have the ability to appear and disappear at will, with a hypnotic quality to their voices, their insistence on being invited in. It all sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? Seems like we've heard something like this before. Could it be in the legends and stories of vampires? Like the black-eyed entities, vampires are described as pale, as capable of stunning and unexpected movement, of possessing hypnotic powers, and of being unable to cross a human threshold without an invitation. And they're hungry, so hungry every moment for the only food that can sustain them: blood. The very essence of human life and vitality. Legends and tales about vampires have existed for thousands of years all around the world and across nearly every human culture. Today, we're pretty fixated on the vampire as defined by European culture, which explains Count Dracula, the vampire Lestat, Count Chocula, and even the Count on Sesame Street. Our modern version of the vampire is also highly sexualized. Drac needs the blood for sure, but our undead boy also really loves the ladies too. The modern vampire seduces as much as he or she slays. But the old legends, the ancient stories, the original folklore of the vampire, not a dashing man in a black cape, but an evil force bent on consuming its victims. Sometimes a demon, sometimes a malevolent spirit, sometimes a revenant, which is basically a ghost, but revenant's the kind of ghost who holds a grudge against the living. A revenant ain't here to be the friendliest ghost you know. Whatever form the vampire takes, the legends all agree that a raging, near insatiable hunger torments every moment of the creature's existence. And the vampire cannot enter any living person's home without an invitation. That is the ancient, eternal, time-honored rule. A rule that's being very carefully honored today in our modern technological world by the black-eyed kids. Which makes you wonder, maybe these black-eyed entities are nothing new. Maybe this is just the way we, the people of our time, make sense of whatever these beings are. Pale, hungry, concealed in the shadows, a flicker at the edge of your vision. Maybe humanity has always shared this world with mythical creatures who aren't mythical at all. Creatures that are here and always have been, unknown to us and mostly unseen, though when our separate realities touch, it would appear that humans seldom have the upper hand. And as superstitious an animal as we are, we cling super tightly to the idea that our 5 senses give us all the information we need to survive and dominate our environment. But even a genius as singular as Albert Einstein wondered about the very real limitations of those 5 human senses. He once said,
"It is entirely possible that behind the perception of our senses, worlds are hidden of which we are unaware."
Skeptics roll their eyes. Eyes that are limited by their size and how much light they can collect. Eyes that can see only visible light, while all around us, there are so many other kinds of light. Gamma rays and X-rays, ultraviolet light, infrared, even radio waves are a form of light, but all invisible to us. And our hearing, impressive as we think it is, doesn't let us eavesdrop on all that much of reality. When it comes to hearing, dogs have us beat. So do cats and elephants and even pigeons. Whatever these hungry, frightening entities are, they may have been walking beside us all along. The ancient Mesopotamians called them by names like Lamashtu, the dark god who craved the blood and flesh of newborn infants. The poor wee things were no safer in Albania, where the Striga drank their blood while they slept. And then there's that hero of undead class warfare, Madagascar's Ramanga, a sort of zombie vampire who feasts on blood and nail clippings of all things, but only from those of noble birth. Way to fight the power, Ramanga. Now that the U.S. Congress has pried open the Pandora's box that is the whole UAP, UFO, are we alone in the universe situation, we're all suddenly hearing phrases like non-human intelligence and non-human biologics and this planet isn't ours. Trippy stuff. So who's to say what the black-eyed kids really are? Ghosts? Aliens? Hybrids? Interdimensional tourists? Complete fiction? One thing's for sure.
What, do you need to get that? We can pause.
Oh, God, hang on. My husband will. Let's just keep rolling. Where am I picking this up?
Okay, you just said one thing's for sure.
Okay. Get a drink. Okay. One thing's for sure. Oh, Kev, can you get that? Kev! Oh, I'm sorry, Max. I think maybe he went somewhere. Kevin! Can you hang on? It's probably just a delivery. Hang on. I'm so sorry. Let me go get that. Here we go. Hang on. Oh, hey. Did you walk all the way up our driveway? All by yourself?
We want to come inside.
Sherry, are you there?
Yeah,
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Honey, I think you're at the wrong house. Does anybody know where you are?
I want to come into your house. You have to let me in. You have to let me in. You have to let me in.
Hang on, I'm going to call your cell.
What? Oh my God. Oh my God, honey, your eyes. What happened?
It won't take long. You have to let me in.
Let us in.
You have to let us in. Let us in now.
Let us
let
in.
me in now.
Let me in.
Let us in.
We want to thank our voice performers who joined us in this episode today: Ryan Poole, Emma Grace Smith, Zoe Hartwell, and Sadie Stilley. They're regular human children, we think. So we thank you for joining us. We're revisiting a couple of early episodes of True Weird Stuff before we added the Post Mortem chat. And this is an episode that is completely unique in all of the 100 and probably 20 now that we've done. We've never done an episode like it before or since, for the simple reason that the word true in the name of the show is something that we really focus on. Like the story, a great story is a great story, but when you find out that it really happened, it adds like another level of, oh no. And we made an exception for this one because Brian Bethel, whose story we tell in this episode, you can say anything you want about lying for attention, lying to get rich, lying to get famous. Here's a guy that's still working as a newspaper reporter. You don't see him hosting his own ghost hunting show on the Travel Channel. He certainly did not get rich. If anything, I think he felt that this harmed his credibility, especially when this story first took off. I think he felt like maybe it harmed his credibility as a journalist. And you'll notice that since this happened, which was back in the 90s, since this happened, other people have talked about Brian Bethel and the Black Eyed Kids, including us. But have you heard Brian Bethel talk about it?
No.
And so I think that's a vote in his favor.
Have you heard Brian Bethel make a ton of money off of this? That'd be no.
Nothing. I mean, this guy isn't at the round table at Ancient Aliens on the History Channel. So his story has a lot of credibility for me. Of course, I just want to believe in stuff. I want the world to be filled with multidimensional mysteries, because otherwise we're just talking meat, and we're just here for such a brief time, and we're surrounded at all times by assholes. And that's just not enough for me. Like, I want more from reality than that. So I'm inclined to give Brian my trust on this one. And also, I just love the way his experience dovetails so nicely with many, many, many other legends and folk tales. And after Brian came out and shared this, other people came forward and said, "Oh my God, I had this happen to me." Now, our skeptics and debunkers are always like, "Well, they're just copycats. They just want attention. They just want to get rich and famous." Okay, even if I gave you 8 out of 10 of them were just glomming on, what about the other 2? So this is a very, very hard story for people to believe who don't want to believe anything like this. Mm-hmm. Where did you come down on it, Max?
I mean, I believe him. I mean, I do believe him. And I think that you did other research that said, yeah, other people are coming forward and have had this experience. So I have to believe that there's some credibility to it. Where they come from, why they're there, all of that stuff is the mystery of this, of course. And you're right. I mean, I imagine some people would say that's just an urban legend. But his description and some of the things that he said about it, they wanted to come into his car. There's what is it about? Is it vampires?
Vampires have, yeah.
So the vampires don't come in somewhere. They'll ask to come in, but they won't unless they're asked. But once you let them in, it's not good for you. I mean, that's the allegedly about that. But I thought that was very interesting, that they were very, very much, it wasn't, we want money, we want anything, we want to come in.
That was the thing with the Black Eyed Kids legends that jumped out at me immediately when I first read Brian Bethel's account on the internet was, oh, that's kind of like vampires. The vampire myths and legends. They will not cross the threshold without an invitation.
Right.
So what I liked about Brian's story, and let me be the first to say that above all things, Brian is a writer. And so writers are not trustworthy necessarily. Like my husband always tells me, he goes, "Woman, you do not like to let a fact get in the way of a story." And but that's what I do for a living, right? Of course not. Like, I love a good story. So I will say, like, first asterisk, Brian's a writer. And do not underestimate a writer's ability to shape reality for you. But the details in his story. So, okay, first up, he's at the strip mall to pay his cable bill. And for younger listeners, before you could pay your bill online, if you were going to be late, you could go drop it in the box at the office of the gas company, or in this case, the cable company. Remember those days? You can still do that. I don't know that anybody does.
You can.
So he's in the strip mall parking lot. He's sitting writing a paper check in his car. The movie theater is behind him. Mortal Kombat is playing. When tap, tap, here are these 2 kids at his window.
And we'll tell you what happens next after this. You got to take a little break.
Yeah, that's right. We have to break. Yeah.
So these kids are standing outside of his car, and they tap on the window. And what do they want? They want to come in.
They want to ride. And so here's what they tell Brian, that they came to see the movie Mortal Kombat, but they left their money at home, and if he would just drive them there, they would get the money and come back and see the movie, which sounds like the sort of thing a kid might do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Except Brian glances at the marquee and realizes that the movie started an hour ago. So if that's not the biggest red flag ever, right? And if you remember, he said that he felt a change in like his own perception. He was reaching to unlock the door to let them in before he caught himself. And then he floored it and got the heck out of there. And in a split second, those kids vanished. So it's a great story. It's filled with suspense and malevolence and mystery. But it also rings true in so many ways, doesn't it?
So you can say that a writer might shape a story, but I look at it another way. A writer is somebody who generally pays more attention to the details of what's happening to them. They generally are able, because they are able to see things that a lot of people might just go by, because a writer goes, hey, this is an experience. I want to be able to remember everything about this so that when I write about it later, I can be accurate.
You're so right about that. And the great podcaster Ira Glass said something that is one of the truest things that anybody's ever said. Stories happen to people who can tell them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, of course, Brian Bethel, he's a journalist. Who, what, where, when, why, right? He's used to collecting the facts to tell a story. So, yeah, he's going to be much, much more, I think, whether he wants to be or not, observant, because that's the job, right?
Right.
That's the job. And so this thing happens to him, and he's scared out of his mind, because there's something when a child behaves in a way that makes your skin crawl, that uncanny valley children of the damn thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's something like really primal that like plucks the guitar strings of your deepest instincts. There's something so wrong with that. He goes off and he writes, he does what a guy like Brian Bethel does. He writes his experience up and shares it with a couple of friends. And then it does the equivalent of going viral back then. And it kicked open a door for all of these other people who didn't know how to describe their experience, they didn't have like the language for it, and nobody wants to be first. You
Right.
know, like that's just like human nature. Like you might be willing to go second or third, but nobody wants to be the first to put their hand up and risk ridicule and scorn. And so let's go with everything that Brian Bethel said happened is true, and that everything all of these other people have described is true. And if you want it to fall down a big old rabbit hole, start hunting around for reports of black-eyed kids.
Mm.
Now, they're not all kids. There are also black-eyed adults. And what you'll get like this sort of consistent through line of day and night. It's not a thing that only happens at night. It's not a thing that only happens in the woods or in a parking lot. People have had a knock on their front door in bright sunny daylight. People have been pumping gas and have turned around, and there is one of these, whatever they are, and they are always, the vibe is always the same. It's very flat, very low key. Nobody raises a voice. It's just this flat insistence. So we have all of that as pretty consistent, right, Max?
Right.
Across multiple geographical regions, countries. Like we have a real consistency in these reports. Worldwide. So what if everyone here is basically telling the truth? What could we be talking about? What could we be sharing our reality with?
You know, Sherry, this reminded me when I re-listened to this story. I thought about a scene from a David Lynch movie called Mystery. It's called Lost Highway, and there's a character called Mystery Man, and he fits the description, the adult version of this. And I'm going to play this for you because you'll listen to him, and he says something about how did you get in my house, and what he says, and it reminded me of this story. So this is the late Robert Blake in his last film appearance, I believe, and Bill Pullman. So here it is.
We've met before, haven't we?
I don't think so. Where was it you think we met?
At your house, don't you remember?
No, I don't. Are you sure?
Of course. As a matter of fact, I'm there right now.
What do you mean you're where right now?
At your house.
That's fucking crazy, man.
Call me. Dial your number. Go ahead. I told you I was here.
How'd you do that?
Ask me.
How'd you get inside my house?
You invited me. It is not my custom to go where I'm not wanted.
I gotta watch this.
The flat affect of the Mystery Man, played by Robert Blake, really fits what you're talking about, because you can see it with the eyes and the pale skin and everything else. So I wonder if this is what David Lynch, when he was doing this movie, based that character on, because it fits perfectly. And there is an unsettling creepiness of his, not just flat affect, but hidden menace behind that affect.
Because he knows he has the upper hand.
Right.
They are stronger than a human being. So I want you to think about, let's entertain the possibility that there are walking amongst us beings that look like us and can mostly pass as human. And this applies to a lot of sort of creepypasta, a lot of ideas of non-human entities. The tall whites, for example, the extraterrestrials that allegedly look like they're really fit folks from Denmark, you know, that crowd, right? Nordic, the tall whites, the Nordic aliens, the black-eyed kids, even like people that have human bodies but no human souls, skin suits. So it's possible to move amongst us mostly undetected until you have to interact with a human being. And that's where the tripwires go off, right?
Right.
And I read a great quote on the interwebs about the uncanny valley. And here we go. Are you ready? Human beings have developed an instinct to be revolted and fearful of something that looks human but isn't, which is what makes robots and androids difficult, right? Because you can get it's what made the Tom Hanks character in the Polar Express animated movie hard. You're close to human, but you're not quite there. And so however this quote goes, it goes like this. We developed an instinct to be fearful and revolted by things that are close to human but aren't really human. Because once upon a time, we interacted with things that were close to human but aren't really human. that all of our instincts and primal responses, in that reptilian portion of our brain, the amygdala, all of those are there for a reason. Now, in the modern world, the post-industrial world, it's very easy to be skeptical and think that we've conquered everything there is to conquer and that we know everything there is to know. But I think it's interesting to entertain the possibility that part of the reason we're so sensitive to things like the black-eyed kids or the tall Nordics or that one asshole we worked with that had no soul. You know the one.
I know which one. You didn't have to explain that one.
Yeah, is because once upon a time, the world was more populated by that than it is now. And we learned to survive by knowing how to avoid contact with that. What do you think about that? Isn't that a fun idea to kick around?
It is. I think that we don't react to anything well that we do not feel has the capacity for empathy, because that's the thing that sort of binds us together as humans, and it binds us with our pets as well, because pets can display that. But when
we sort of know.
Yeah.
We sort of know. We do.
But if you run into anybody and they have a vacancy in their eyes, and there's a chill with that, because inside your mechanism for survival says this is a threat to your survival, and
you respond to it. Your fight or flight response is triggered because we think of ourselves as top chain predators, but we actually are prey. Human beings are prey animals. And for most of our existence on this planet, that's what we were. So of course, we've developed these extremely finely tuned instincts for knowing when we are in danger, in the same way that we can tell when someone's looking at us when our backs are turned. That's part of that protective prey behavior. Like if you're about to be pounced on and eaten, wouldn't it be handy if you had some sense that maybe you weren't alone in the forest, right?
Right.
So if you look at like human instincts and human responses, if you consider our physiology, our central nervous systems, and then you add into that, you take a layer of frosting that is made up of our oral traditions, our folk legends, our stories. There is not a single story in the whole wide world that has not been told by a human being. And so, of course, we have our fallibility, right? We have our biases and our poor memories and our imagination and, whether or not we were hungry and cold when the event happened. All of that factors in. But every story that we tell has, at some level, a seed of reality in it. A seed of truth in it, every story. And that's what makes these black-eyed kids legends so entertaining and interesting for me, is that you can really open your mind to the possibility that, oh, crap, there's a lot here that we simply don't understand. And as we pointed out in this episode, we can't even perceive.
Mm-hmm. And I think the thing, obviously, the eyes tell a lot. They really do. As they say, it's the window to the soul. But I can tell you that if you watch people who are playing bad people on film or on stage, one of the tricks you can do as an actor is to not move your eyes. One of the things that dogs have this capacity for, you can see the whites of their eyes. They can move their eyes around, But a lot of animals in the wild, if they want to look at something to the right, they don't move their eyes, they move their head. So if you do that as a human being and don't move your eyes with that, there's a chilling effect that has. Yeah. So I think that, when Brian Bethel experienced this, that might have been part of what he was experiencing it, because these children weren't threatening. They weren't
not
like
overtly.
no. Yeah, you're right. They were invading a space where they shouldn't by tapping on the window, obviously, but it's not like they had an axe or a firearm or something like that was going to threaten him. But his instincts, because of what was happening with the eyes, his instinct was avoid.
Well, and their appearance, it's not just the fact that there's no iris or sclera or pupil. It's just a black void in their eyes. There are other aspects to their appearance. Their skin is just ever so slightly off. Their hair is always just a little bit weirdly unkempt. And their clothing is also just a little bit off. And you'll hear people say, I think they were wearing hoodies or maybe just black jackets. Like there's just a strangeness. It's like they got close, but not all the way. It's very uncanny valley. Like you're the conductor on the Polar Express. You almost human, but you're not quite human. And I will say
from another era, like from another era. I think that was one of the things that I read about with that some of the clothing looked like it was from somewhere else, and certainly not here or from this time period.
Well, and if you went with the vampire hypothesis, that's a no-brainer. Like,
I hadn't thought about that.
It would be kind of tricky to keep up with the latest and greatest. You might think after you've been kicking around for however long that a white shirt and black pants are a white shirt and black pants, when you and I both know that's not true at all. You can look like, in a white shirt and black pants, you can look like a waiter, you can look like an Amish farmer, you can look like a Victorian child. Like, it all depends on what that white shirt and those black pants look like. I will say, and I know it'll sound like super nuts and dramatic or whatever, but I've had a lot of time to think about this. And I've reflected on it with the accounts of relatives who were there before I was born, and the family stories and my own experiences and the other things that I know. I don't think my father had a soul, Max. Now, I know a lot of people that have a difficult, dangerous parent might say something like that. But I say that with all sincerity. My father was very, very smart, and he could be very charming. But there was nothing there. He had the flat black eyes of a shark. I mean, he was a flat, dead walk-in skin suit. And he had one sister and a couple of brothers that my grandmother fostered children from Catholic Charities. But of course, he didn't recognize them as his brothers. He barely recognized his sister as his sister. And, she told me before she died that she had lived her entire life absolutely terrified of him. And that part of the reason that he had been so indulged is because when they were children, everyone was afraid of him. It was like Damien from The Omen or some shit. Mm-hmm. And his father was away at sea in the Navy, World War II and the Korean conflict. So he ran roughshod. He ran roughshod over his mother and her mother, his sister, the two brothers. He was terrible. He was a monster in a man suit. I don't have a single recollection in my whole life with him where I wasn't afraid of him. And afraid of him, I mean, he never hit me. He beat the daylights out of my brother, but he never hit me because I was a girl. He had other special things for me. But I was afraid of him because when I looked at him, I knew that absolutely anything was possible, and most of it not good. That the only way to really be safe with him was to be away from him, which is why as a kid I was so adept at disappearing in plain sight. I mean, I could be in the room with you and invisible, and it's a lovely skill that I still have that I have to remember sometimes that I don't need quite as much because it makes it hard to be married to me, for example. But I think he's one of those people that when they were coming through the assembly line, they got skipped and there was no soul there. So when I read these accounts of these black-eyed kids and the feeling of when you look into their faces and you recognize that you are looking at something that may be presenting as a person, but there's an alien quality to it. I don't mean alien outer space. I mean,
No.
there's
I
an
knew what you meant.
alien, there is an alien quality here. We are not the same. We cannot communicate. I cannot beseech you for mercy. You have none. In fact, you're looking at me the way you might look at an insect and deciding whether or not you're going to step on it or kick it aside. And that was the vibe that I think Brian Bethel got that night in that parking lot. I am looking at something that's constructed as a human child, but there is this ineffable, dark, alien presence here also. Have you ever had an experience like that in real life?
A couple times. I have a woman who's a friend who's a woman. We were just friends, and I did meet her son, and I remember feeling that there was something off. And when I say there was something off, it's like there was a real disconnect to anything emotional. It was really flat. And this is what she said about her own flesh and blood. I think my son is either a psychopath or a sociopath. I love him. He's my son, but I don't trust him at all. And she said, I think he was born this way. I don't think anything happened to him that caused him to be this way. But I believe that he is this way and that I will only allow him in my life to a certain point because of that. And she says this about her own flesh and blood.
But I understand because I removed my father from my life for very similar reasons. Like I'm a girl. I'm one of these girls with daddy issues. And by the way, that is something that pisses me off. When people go, you have daddy issues. Yeah. As in I didn't have one. And you should be ashamed of yourself for pointing that out. like I would not have said to you, you strike me as someone whose mother died of cancer when he was young. Like it's an asshole thing to say to a person. Like I had any power over any of that as a child. But I understand where she's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
There are people, and statistically speaking, we brush up against them more frequently than we would like because of the number of people in the population that are, that have psychopathy.
Mm-hmm.
And there are plenty of people who are literal psychopaths who are not like murderers and fiends. They're like CEOs and vice presidents.
Yeah,
and stuff, right?
Right. We always think of those things in terms of committing crimes, but those are people, as you said, who excel very well because they're not. I can remember I had to be a boss at a radio station, and we were sold, and I had to fire people, and I couldn't sleep for days knowing I had to fire somebody who
didn't deserve
a small child. And I'm going, and I remember, so I had real, I'm just not cut out for that. I'm not cut out for any of the stuff that goes with that. But if you if you lack the compassion wiring, that sort of wiring that goes with some of that stuff, you can easily do that and move ahead and assimilate yourself and look like you're just the same as everybody else, but you're not.
But you're not. And I trust people. When someone says to me, listen, this person makes me so uneasy and afraid. I don't like being in the room. I don't want to be alone with this person. Please don't let this person near me or touch me. I completely respect that because that's you honoring your own instincts. Mm-hmm. We get into so much trouble when we drown those voices out. We just do. One of the things that Max and I have always been sort of obsessed with is that scene in the movie The Girl from the Dragon Tattoo where the killer is like, you know what your problem is? You're too polite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because we're socialized. We're socialized to be polite. We're socialized to swallow back our own anxiety or revulsion or fear because that would be rude and judgmental and crazy. But you know what? It isn't. It's none of those things. You should honor your instincts. And I'll tell you what Brian Bethel did that night in that strip mall parking lot as his hand was reaching to pop the lock. And this is, 1996. So, they were pop locks and crank windows probably in a newspaper reporter's car. Those folks don't make any money. He didn't have anything fancy, right? He was reaching over to pop those locks, and he suddenly came back into his body and realized he said he was racked with terror. Now, what grown man writing his cable bill is suddenly racked with terror by the sight of a couple of middle schoolers? He honored that instinct that said flight.
And said, I need to share this. I need to write about this.
Well, if you're a writer, and I guess this is probably true if you're a painter or a musician, you sometimes aren't sure exactly what you think about a thing or feel about a thing until you write it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had a lot of people who are in the arts tell me, I'm not really sure what I know or what I believe until I pick up my guitar. That was his form of making sense of his experiences in the world. And again, I just have to ask you, as you call BS on him, what has this done for him? Yeah, we're sitting here talking about him, but do you think this is how he wants to be talked about?
No, I'm sure
Probably not.
I'm sure not. Can we talk?
I did reach out to him. I tried to track him down.
I remember.
And was like, we're going to tell this story. I'd rather you told your own story because I'm really careful with living people on this podcast because especially if there's a crime, I don't want to make entertainment content out of your suffering. And I felt like he should be the one to tell it. But understandably, he don't want any part of this. That's how much he doesn't want your attention or to be rich and famous as the Black Eyed Kids guy.
Can we talk about how we put the episode itself together? So Sherry said, well, I'm writing this thing about the Black Eyed Kids. And I said, yeah. And she says, we're going to get all these children's voices together. And so we had to try to do that. And for the most part, I thought it came out pretty well with what we were doing and trying to do with that. And then my favorite part was the thing that we did at the end, which is different than any episode that we've done before or since, where Sherry, here is the end, Sherry has the Black Eyed Kids at the door. And we weren't sure how that was going to be received, but people loved it. And the other thing that was interesting about this episode, up in this episode, I don't remember how many we had done previous to this, but maybe, I don't know, 20 something, 30, I don't know. This got the most chatter. We got so many people that were like, oh, that episode with the black-eyed children. Oh my God. People really seem to connect to this in some way.
People we love to be scared. And, a lot of people just love paranormal. And there are some great paranormal shows out there. We dip in and out of it, but I'm so obsessed. My hyperfixation is oh my God, that really happened.
Mm-hmm.
That's my hyperfixation. I love telling people something really unhinged and going, and you know what? It really happened. Let me tell you where. My poor husband cannot escape me. My kids can't escape me. So yeah, but you're right. We had not done an episode like this. I'd like to there are a couple of kind of woo-woo topics that I personally am super obsessed with and would love to do a True Weird Stuff episode. It's finding the true part of the weird that I'm absolutely I think about it all the time. There is a corner of my brain that is always thinking about staircases in the forest. Always. And we've done a couple of cryptid Bigfoot episodes,
right?
Because we interviewed a Bigfoot tracker, and remember the episode, The Big Muddy Monster?
Yes.
About that wild Bigfoot flap of sightings in the 70s, and we told almost the entire episode through police reports,
right?
Because it wasn't just my drunken cousin Kenny Ronnie Wayne says he saw the Bigfoot.
No, it was a bunch of people.
Yeah, the entire episode was told through the voices of the police officers who not only investigated, but witnessed themselves things they could not explain. So when we can find that true doorway to walk through, then it's so much fun diving into these sort of paranormal subjects. And this one, because of Brian Bethel, gave us that doorway. And naturally, like for like I would much rather do this kind of stuff than anything because I'm so into it.
Yeah.
But if we don't have that true element, then what are we doing? We're just rehashing some stuff that is just kind of fun to talk about.
Well, you're always going to have urban legends about things, but the fact that Brian and others who are not getting anything out of this have had this experience with these children, it, there's got to be something there. Did they just randomly make this story up? I don't think so. I think that there is something spooky and unexplained that is happening.
I told this story that happened to my mother when she was in like 7th grade. I told this story on our radio show, but I don't think I've ever told it here. And it has a Black Eyed Kids vibe. So my mom had an older sister and a younger brother, and they grew up in South Philly, like in the 50s. They lived in one of those like row homes, brownstone row homes in South Philly. My mother's mother worked as a waitress for a restaurant at the Philadelphia airport. And my my mother's father, was retired. He was much older. He had a disability and he liked to bet on the ponies. He was always at the racetrack. And the 3 kids went to Catholic school, and both, at this time, this was before my grandfather retired, both parents were at work, and the school was in the neighborhood. So sometimes my mom would come home and make herself lunch and then go back, right? So one day, my mother comes home, as she had a gazillion times before. And these are city kids. These are kids who don't take school buses to school. My mom, as a little girl, rode the subway and took the SEPTA buses, and was a very independent, street smart child. So she's 7th grade. She comes home. She lets herself in, and she makes a sandwich, and she eats lunch, and she's getting ready to go. And she decides to run up to her bedroom to get something, a book, to bring back to school with her. So these row houses in South Philly, you would have the main level. Beneath that, you would have typically a finished basement. Then the next level would be where some of the bedrooms were, and then there would be a top level where the rest of the bedrooms were. 4 stories, but very narrow. You know what I'm talking about, Max. If you've never been in one of these houses, very narrow, deep, kind of like a shotgun house in the South, but 4 stories, right? So my grandparents' bedroom is on the 2nd floor, and my mother's bedroom that she shares with her sister is on the top floor. So my mom's in her Catholic school uniform, and she goes bouncing up the stairs all the way to the tip top, and she gets her book out of her bedroom, and she comes downstairs, and she's on the 2nd floor landing. And she said, "I don't know what it was. I must have caught something in my peripheral vision." And she turned, and her parents' bedroom door was about 3/4 of the way ajar. And she glances into her parents' bedroom, and she sees a man reflected in the mirror on the dresser in the bedroom. She can't see the man himself, but she only sees his reflection. And when my mom told me this story, this was before the Black Eyed Kids were a twinkle in our eye. Okay, this was years ago. So my mom said that she froze, the disbelief of it. And she knows it's not her father. My grandpa was very tall and thin, and he had cancer of the esophagus. So he had one of those big holes in his throat, and it was covered by like a little lace cravat kind of a thing, like a doily. And this was a younger, this was not my grandfather. Anyway, she glances, and their eyes meet in the mirror. And my mother said her entire body went like ice. And there's not a movement. They're looking at each other. And my mother said, she said, I knew not to scream. I had to get out of that house right now. She turned around and flung herself down the stairs, through the front door, slammed it, and took off running for school.
I can't imagine.
So gets home that day, and now she's not in trouble because, you know, she was allowed to come home and eat lunch. That was a routine thing. But she's got to find a way to tell her mom and dad what happened. And she said that it was like, she was like, it was like something was on me, and I, like, she couldn't figure out how to say the words. And this, my mom, like, I take after my mom. We don't struggle. She finally tells her parents, she's like, I came home for lunch and there was a man in the house. And my grandfather immediately, you know, what do you mean there was a man in the house? He was in your bedroom. I saw him reflected in the mirror. They turned the house upside down. There's no sign of anything missing. I mean, they were poor. It wasn't like there was anything to steal, but nothing was missing. Nothing was really disturbed. They could find no sign of forced entry. The house had been locked when they left for work, locked when she came home for lunch, locked when they came home at the end of the day. And so the story of it became, well, maybe, you know, maybe you imagined it. It was a trick of the light. It was a shadow. You didn't see, there was nobody here. You never saw that. But my mother maintains to this day, like, I don't know, 63 years later or more, 65, 68 years later, that it's as real to her as if it just happened yesterday. And she knows perfectly well what she saw. And there was something about, she said there was something in his face, his eyes, that turned her to ice. So, I don't know, right? Who knows?
Wow.
Who knows?
Was it real? Was it a ghost?
That's just it. Who knows? But I think you can see why, like, as a child, like, I was indulged in the things I said I saw or witnessed or believed or whatever. I mean, my mom was like, yeah, I mean, okay. You know, I used to talk to the angels.
Yeah.
There was all kinds of stuff. And my mother was very matter of fact about it. She's like, well, you know, you're talking to the angels. Like, she had no trouble accepting that because something had happened to her in 7th grade that made her question reality. And when I think about, like, my mom at 13 years old, alone in a house with an intruder of any kind.
That is really, really spooky, Sherry.
Isn't that the best spooky story?
It really is.
Yeah.
And I mean, because you can picture it happening. And you can also get the feeling that you would not run immediately, that there would be a moment that probably seemed like an eternity where you would freeze because you were so shocked. That's what she
said. She said it felt like it lasted forever. So when my mom grows up and marries a demon, that's my father, and my grandparents still live in that house. And so I'm a little girl. It's before we moved out west. I'm a little girl, and I loved spending time with my grandparents because life was so exotic. My parents lived in a little house in the suburb with a tiny yard, and my grandparents lived in the city, and their yard was covered in cement, and the house was it seemed so vast and mysterious to me, you know, a little suburban ranch house cut to a 4-story city row house. There were just a million things to explore. And when I stayed with my grandparents, I usually stayed with my cousin Stevie, who was my mom's youngest brother's only child. And we would sleep in the upstairs bedrooms on the very tip top. And it was really cool because, like, it was like a treehouse. We were up there all by ourselves, and we could open the windows and watch the big kids playing stickball at night in the street. It was a really vibrant community loaded up with immigrant families of all sorts. And it was just a really neat childhood experience. But the second floor, where my grandparents' bedroom was, I didn't know this story back then. So keep that in mind, okay? I knew this story as an adult that I just shared with you. But you'd come down to that second floor landing, and there was just something about that second floor landing that when I was a kid, that was intolerable to me. I did not like being on the second floor of that house ever. And so a million years go by. I'm like 6, 7 years old before we moved out west, having these adventures with my grandparents in the city. And then, decades later, my mother casually tells me that, she had a black-eyed entity encounter standing in the same spot on the landing where I'd have thrown myself down the stairs and risked breaking something before I'd have hung out in that part of the house. Not a lot of daylight, it's a narrow row house. You've only got windows on the front face, on the front elevation.
Mm-hmm.
And on an overcast day, that light didn't penetrate very far. And it was just a weird, shadowy spot in that house. So you don't know, right? You don't know. If you live with an animal, I'm sure you've had this with Mojo. You'll be sitting there on the couch minding your business, just being a person. And suddenly your dog or cat, have you ever had this happen with Mojo?
Mm-hmm.
They sit up.
It's like they're seeing something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And maybe they are. Maybe they are. Our perception is really limited. So, if it's real, just don't let them in.
That's it. If they ask,
that's
to
all
come
you
in,
got.
Don't invite them in. I do not go where I am not invited.
If someone is standing at the threshold to your home or outside your vehicle, and they are asking you to invite them in, I don't care what they look like. I'd go ahead and consider that an ominous sign, because that's not how people act, is it really? Have you ever had an encounter where someone was insistent that you invite them in?
Not that comes to mind, but when somebody is insistent, I am generally more insistent of no, you won't.
Yeah, because there's something, again, there's your reptile brain going.
Now, the guy that was trying to break down the door, he was being very insistent, but he was drunk and at the wrong apartment.
And not asking to be invited.
He wasn't really asking, no. He was throwing his body against the door, which was a bit disconcerting.
There was one black-eyed children. I've read a gazillion accounts of these. And there was one that I read that stayed with me. The person let them in. And they had what amounts to what we would call a lost time episode.
Oh.
They survived it. They survived the encounter, whatever it was, but they don't really know what happened after they let this stranger into their home. They're not really clear. And they were physically sick afterward for days and days. And they can't, like when they press on that memory, there's something bad on the other side of it. Now, could that be BS? Absolutely. Oh, God, you betcha. You betcha. But I woke up in a world today where my 401k is a fairy tale. So why can't I believe in this, right? So, yeah.
Well, that's Annie in the background, the dog-sitting dog. So sorry about that.
She is a very, very bossy girl. So before we did this episode, did you believe after we did this episode, did anything change one way or the other?
I think there's something there. I do. I think there's something there. It's not that I'm going to believe in everything, but the account that Brian Bethel had is so believable. And when you can think of situations where you have been, where the hair on the back of your neck went up, you go,
Yeah. And wouldn't it be awesome to discover that you live in a world filled with ancient mysteries and forgotten magic? and that you share this reality across many unseen, unperceivable dimensions with many, many other kinds of life, good and bad. I mean, I know there are people that don't want that, but there's nothing I'd enjoy more than for the tooth fairy to be real. That would be just great.
Well, it certainly makes life more interesting.
It would be so good to have magic in the world. So that's it for this episode. And we thank you for your patience. We've had some stuff come up that's really put pressure on us time wise. One of them is my mom, that long ago little girl who had an encounter on the second floor landing of her childhood home, is very old now and all by herself and needs some attention. And so I was like, Max, I got to get out there. I got to get out to the desert and be with my mom. So I'll be working from there for the next little bit. But Max and Doc, our producer Carrie Bowser, were very gracious in freeing up some time for me to be able to get out there.
And thank you for listening. These episodes are it's a passion. It's fun to put together. It's great to put together, but they are really time consuming, and sometimes you just don't have enough time.
I need to get west, and we spend about 20 hours on every episode. And I've just had family stuff all over me. But where my mom lives now, there are plenty of chupacabras and all sorts of really good stuff. In fact, the last time I was out there, I was sitting on the back porch with my mom, and we looked up in the sky, and my mother said, "Oh, Sherry, what could that be?" And we looked up in the sky. My mom lives there's a ridge line that runs above her house. And it gets pretty dark, even though where she lives has become kind of bustling. It still gets pretty dark at night. And we're looking up. And I said, could that be like a helicopter? And she said, that's not a helicopter. And we watched it for 10 minutes. We had no idea what it was. It moved in such a strange, unexpected way. Not at all. There's an airport, there's where she lives, and she's just a couple hours north of Vegas. But this thing did whatever this was, it behaved strangely. And I've had everyone tell me it was Starlink, it was a satellite, it was Venus. And you know what, folks? It was none of those things. It was swamp gas and a weather balloon. That's what it was. Yeah, maybe.
Could be.
I don't know. But we got some desert style adventures, so I'll be working on True Weird Stuff from there. But we also wanted to it's been our goal to go back and add Post Mortem chats to all the early episodes. And so this was one we were looking forward to because it was unlike anything we'd ever done.
Yeah.
And if you have had an encounter that is inexplicable,
Mm-hmm.
that made all your spidey senses tingle,
Mm-hmm.
that you can't in any way account for, and that you can't let go of it, it's haunting you, we would enjoy hearing from you.
We sure would.
Lots of ways you can reach us. You can DM us on the socials or the True Weird Instagram, or you can call us at 844-52-SHERI. Oh, and by the way, we don't have a good stable of talented children willing to work for free, so just going to put that out there. We would be doing a lot more creepy kid stuff if we had more creepy kids that wouldn't wear Max out trying to get their voices recorded. So thank you. We love you. And thank you again if you voted for True Weird Stuff for the People's Voice Award and the freaking Webbies. We're so excited to be nominated for a Webby. That's as big a deal as it gets in our world, and we're just over the moon. Okay. All right. Thank you. We'll see you next time.
And if you listen to us on Apple Podcasts, hit the plus button in the top right corner. And now it helps an independent podcast like ours to get discovered. And we really appreciate it if you subscribe, rate, and review True Weird Stuff.
Hit our website, trueweirdstuff.com, for show notes and photos and videos when we have it, and bonus content. Everything True Weird is waiting for you at trueweirdstuff.com.
And follow True Weird Stuff on Instagram.
True Weird Stuff is a Now Media production. Our executive producer is Anthony Garcia. The show is written and hosted by me, Sherry Lynch, along with my deeply weird director, Max Sweeten. Our equally odd producer is Carrie Bowser. Additional production by the mysterious Stephen Call. Our digital witch and social media cult leader is Heather Furr. Original graphics by Kevin Nash. Original artworks by Olivia Axlin. True weird original music composed and performed by Jack Griffin and Zane Nash. Copyright 2025 Now Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs remembered.